Brooke's eyes flashed with fury as she strode down the aisle, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "Clear the aisle now, or security will be here before you know it." What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The night was heavy with a quiet tension as the small regional jet sat idly on the tarmac, its engines whispering a promise of distant journeys. A pale crescent moon hovered over the silent runway, casting long shadows that merged with the deep indigo of the sky. In the dim glow of the terminal's neon lights, every sound was amplified: the low murmur of anxious passengers, the steady rhythm of footsteps on polished floors, and the occasional clink of a rolling suitcase. It was a night that seemed to harbor secrets, a night when ordinary events might soon transform into something unexpected. Inside the aircraft, the interior lights were set to a soft, warm glow designed to ease the nerves of travelers. The scent of brewed coffee and fresh linen mingled with the faint aroma of jet fuel seeping in from the engines. At the front of the plane, near the narrow windows, worked a dedicated flight attendant named Brooke. Her eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the cabin with practiced precision. Brooke had been on countless flights, and her calm demeanor was as much a part of her uniform as the crisp blue blouse she wore. Yet, tonight there was an undercurrent of restlessness in her movements, a subtle twitch in her smile, a barely noticeable frown that hinted at a deeper unease. Brooke's thoughts wandered back to the countless moments in her career when she had encountered unusual situations. Tonight, however, a strange feeling tugged at her heart. It was as if the very air inside the plane was charged with a silent warning, urging her to pay attention. A single, unexplainable shiver ran down her spine as she straightened a row of neatly arranged magazines on a tray cart. She could not shake the impression that something significant was about to happen, something that would disrupt the delicate balance of routine. Meanwhile, in one of the middle rows, the Walker family settled into their seats. Marcus Walker, a tall man with kind eyes and a quiet strength, helped his wife, Angela, arrange her belongings in the overhead bin. Their children, Tiana and Darius, chattered softly between themselves, their voices mingling with the ambient hum of the aircraft. The Walkers had traveled many times together, and their bond was evident in the gentle gestures and shared smiles. Angela's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and trepidation as she glanced around the cabin, taking in the details of the polished interior and the meticulous order maintained by the crew. The contrast between Brooke's internal disquiet and the Walker family's calm anticipation could not have been starker. Yet, beneath the veneer of routine, the threads of fate were beginning to weave a pattern that none could foresee. As the flight attendant moved gracefully down the aisle, her footsteps echoing on the soft carpet, a strange silence enveloped the front section of the plane. It was broken only by a whispered conversation between two passengers seated near the emergency exit, a conversation filled with vague references to an unsettling omen and warnings that only the night could know. Though their words were lost in the background, they resonated in the quiet spaces of Brooke's mind. Outside, the wind began to pick up, its soft gusts mingling with the murmur of voices and the mechanical heartbeat of the plane. The soft patter of rain started at the edge of the tarmac, gradually intensifying into a rhythmic drumming that seemed to echo the pulse of the aircraft. This natural percussion, unexpected in its intensity, added a layer of urgency to the atmosphere inside. Passengers glanced nervously at windows, unsure if the storm was merely a distant inconvenience or a harbinger of something more profound. Brooke paused for a moment near the galley, her eyes lingering on the reflection of her own face in the stainless steel surfaces. In that brief reflection, she saw not just the professional she had honed over years of service, but a person caught in the quiet interplay of destiny and duty. Her mind flickered back to memories of flights where unexpected incidents had led to dramatic changes in her life, moments that had revealed the fragility of normalcy. Tonight, a similar sense of foreboding filled the air, and she could feel it in the subtle tremor of her hands as she prepared a cup of tea for a restless passenger. As the minutes ticked by, the gentle hum of conversation and the rustle of fabrics began to merge into a single, continuous murmur. The subtle shift in the tone of the evening was almost imperceptible, yet it carried with it the weight of impending drama. Brooke moved with deliberate care, ensuring every passenger felt attended to, every need met with a professional smile. Yet, in the depths of her eyes, one could see the silent questioning of fate, a silent inquiry into whether tonight would be just another flight or the beginning of a story that would change everything. In the background, the Walker family exchanged soft words of reassurance. Marcus's deep, steady voice told a quiet joke that brought a gentle laugh from his children, momentarily easing the tension. Angela's gaze, however, drifted to the dark windows, as if she could read the future in the swirling patterns of the rain. There was an unspoken understanding between them that tonight was different. The air was thick with possibility, with an undercurrent of events that had yet to be named. A sudden jolt shook the plane ever so slightly, a brief reminder of the forces of nature that lay beyond the thin metal walls of the cabin. The passengers tensed, and a murmur of concern rippled through the aisle. Brooke quickly reassured everyone with calm words, her voice steady and soothing. But as she moved on, the shock of that small disturbance lingered, a reminder that even in the most controlled environments, unpredictability was never far away. In that quiet moment, as the rain intensified and the plane continued its slow taxi on the runway, the stage was silently set. The air was filled with both anticipation and a forewarning of the trials to come. Brooke's heart beat in tandem with the rhythmic drumming of the rain, and the subtle exchanges among the passengers carried an unspoken promise of conflict and change. The ordinary had shifted, and beneath the surface of everyday life, a storm of emotions and unforeseen events was gathering strength. Every detail of that night, the flickering lights, the soft murmur of voices, the gentle clink of a cup being set down, wove together into a tapestry of fate. It was a tapestry that spoke of lives intertwined by chance, of moments that held the potential to alter destinies. As Brooke made her way back to her station, she could not help but feel that this flight, like all others before it, was on the cusp of something remarkable. And though she could not name the danger or foresee the exact course of events, one truth remained clear. By the time the journey was done, nothing would ever be the same again. The night deepened, the rain persisted, and within the confines of that small aircraft, the first act of an unfolding drama had quietly begun. Brooke moved through the cabin with a practiced ease, her smile gentle, yet her eyes holding a glimmer of inner conflict. Born into a family that prized order and tradition, she had always believed in upholding the rules without exception. As a flight attendant, her dedication was evident in every careful step, every thoughtful gesture towards the passengers. Yet beneath that professional exterior lay a person wrestling with beliefs and past experiences that often left her feeling torn between duty and personal judgment. Brooke's heart was loyal to the idea of service, yet the weight of her past and the expectations ingrained in her made her approach every encounter with a measured, sometimes cold precision. The Walkers, too, were part of this carefully choreographed world. Marcus Walker, a tall and steady man, had spent his life balancing resilience with a quiet dignity. He had a deep sense of responsibility for his family, a responsibility that went far beyond the practicalities of everyday life. Marcus believed in fairness and the importance of giving everyone a chance, a belief that he had passed on to his wife Angela and their children. Angela, with eyes that shone with both warmth and cautious wisdom, was the heart of the family. Her nurturing spirit was evident in the way she comforted her children and shared hopeful glances with Marcus, even in moments of uncertainty. Tiana, the eldest of the Walker children, possessed a quiet determination and an intuitive understanding of the world that often belied her age. She was perceptive, noticing small injustices and holding herself to a higher standard than most. Darius, younger and more playful, carried the innocence of youth with him, though he too had seen moments in life that taught him about the harshness of the world. Their family had always been tightly knit, bound by shared struggles and mutual support, a unity that made every hardship bearable. As the evening progressed, Brooke continued to perform her duties with the same meticulous care that had earned her a reputation for excellence. However, inside her, a battle quietly simmered. Her initial goal for every flight was simple: to ensure that every passenger experienced a safe, pleasant journey, one defined by routine and predictability. Yet tonight, the quiet hum of the engines and the murmurs of contentment seemed to underscore a rising tension. There was an unmistakable feeling that this flight was different, and Brooke sensed that the balance she had so carefully maintained was at risk of tipping. In the soft glow of the cabin, Brooke's internal thoughts often wandered back to memories of earlier encounters, times when her actions, driven by ingrained biases or a moment of weakness, had led to outcomes she now quietly regretted. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her personal feelings in check, on serving every passenger with equal care, regardless of who they were. But the seeds of doubt had been planted long ago, and they sometimes sprouted in the most unguarded moments. Tonight, as she glanced at the Walker family settling in their seats, a subtle unease stirred within her. It was as if the presence of the Walkers reminded her of challenges she had long tried to ignore. Marcus and Angela exchanged quiet words as they organized their belongings, their conversation punctuated by gentle reassurances to their children. Their bond was evident not only in their soft laughter and shared smiles, but also in the silent understanding that the world was not always as welcoming as it should be. For Marcus, every journey was a testament to resilience, a chance to prove that dignity and respect could prevail even in the face of adversity. Angela, too, carried an inner strength that had been forged through years of confronting unspoken biases and subtle rejections. They had come together as a family with hope and determination, but they were also aware that the world could sometimes be unkind. Tiana's eyes, dark and watchful, occasionally met those of Brooke as she looked out the window. In those fleeting moments, there was a silent exchange, a mixture of caution, curiosity, and a hint of defiance. Darius, with his bright smile and unburdened laughter, seemed oblivious to the tension swirling around him, his world still intact with the magic of childhood innocence. In many ways, the Walkers represented everything that Brooke's inner doubts sought to undermine, and yet their presence also stirred something within her that she struggled to comprehend. Brooke's initial goal was not one born out of malice. It was simply the desire to maintain order and uphold the standards that had been instilled in her from a young age. Yet, as she moved closer to the Walker family's row, a conflict began to build within her, a conflict fueled by long-held prejudices and the fear of disruption to the carefully ordered world she had built for herself. She had spent years convincing herself that she was fair and impartial, that her actions were always guided by professionalism. But deep down, there was an unspoken tension, a friction between the voice of her duty and the echoes of a past that still whispered in moments like this. The contrast between Brooke's internal struggle and the calm unity of the Walkers became a quiet centerpiece of the flight. Marcus's steady presence and Angela's gentle resilience were a constant reminder of the humanity that often went unseen by those who clung to narrow perceptions. Tiana's keen awareness and Darius's innocent joy provided a subtle challenge to the status quo, a reminder that every individual deserved respect regardless of appearances or backgrounds. In the soft cadence of their interactions, there was a clear sense of purpose, a drive to live authentically, to overcome the prejudices that had too long divided people. Yet for Brooke, that same authenticity was elusive. Her commitment to her role was unquestionable. But so, too, was the burden of personal history and the silent biases that sometimes crept into her judgments. Tonight, as she prepared to move forward with her duties, the internal conflict that had simmered for years threatened to manifest in actions she had long vowed to avoid. She was caught in a delicate balance, the desire to serve with unerring professionalism, and the nagging doubt that whispered of an injustice lurking beneath the surface of routine interactions. As the flight continued and the minutes melted into the steady hum of conversation and engine noise, the stage was set for a confrontation that would force all parties to reckon with the complexities of their inner worlds. For Brooke, the challenge was not merely one of maintaining order, but of confronting the very essence of her identity, a task that would demand courage, self-reflection, and ultimately the choice between following the well-trodden path or forging a new way forward. The air in the cabin, heavy with expectation, hinted at the inevitability of change, and as each character settled further into their roles, the impending clash of values became a silent, ever-present force. In that quiet space, where duty met desire and hope met apprehension, every individual aboard the plane was unknowingly poised at the edge of transformation. The flight was not just a means of travel, it was a crucible in which the true nature of each soul would be revealed. And as Brooke glanced once more at the Walker family, she felt the stirrings of a decision that would soon alter the course of her life, leaving no room for a return to the past. A sudden commotion broke the fragile silence that had settled over the cabin. It began with a faint sound, a clatter of something dropped near the Walker family's row. At first, it was nearly lost amid the ambient hum of the engines and murmurs of conversation. But then, as if time itself had slowed, the noise grew louder and more insistent. Brooke, who had been methodically attending to a passenger in the forward section, felt her heart skip a beat. Instinctively, she turned her attention toward the disturbance. A young man from the Walker family, Tiana's older brother, had accidentally knocked over a small tray of beverages. The tray toppled with a clatter that echoed in the narrow space of the aisle. In that brief moment of chaos, Brooke's senses sharpened. She rushed toward the source, her footsteps quick and deliberate. Yet as she approached, something in her expression shifted, a subtle tightening of her jaw, and a flash of disapproval in her eyes. The incident, though minor in itself, had ignited a spark within her that she had long tried to suppress. Marcus, noticing the commotion, leaned over to Angela in a silent, concerned gesture. Angela's eyes widened, a mix of worry and resignation flickering across her face. Tiana, who had witnessed the fall from across the aisle, clenched her hands tightly in her lap, her gaze shifting from her brother to the flight attendant with a blend of anticipation and trepidation. Darius, still lost in the innocence of childhood wonder, continued to watch, unaware of the undercurrents of tension that were about to engulf the flight. Brooke's professional demeanor wavered as she surveyed the scene. In her mind, memories of past encounters, of moments where the rules had clashed with unspoken biases, resurfaced with a force that startled her. For years, she had striven to maintain the illusion of impartiality, to treat every passenger with the same courteous efficiency. But as she stood before the Walker family, a storm of conflicting emotions roiled within her. The trivial accident had become a canvas on which years of personal prejudice and unresolved inner turmoil were about to be projected. With a curt nod, Brooke signaled that everything was under control. But her voice, when she addressed the young man, carried an edge that did not belong in her usual gentle tone. "You need to be more careful," she said, her words clipped and cold. The boy's eyes widened, not just from the sudden rebuke, but from the harshness that accompanied it. He stammered an apology, his voice barely audible over the soft drumming of the rain outside. But the apology was met with a rigidity in Brooke's posture, a firmness that left no room for further explanation or discussion. Angela, sitting nearby, exchanged a quick glance with Marcus. The unspoken understanding between them was palpable. They had faced subtle indignities before, and their hearts ached at the sight of their children subjected to an unexpected rebuke. The incident, small as it seemed, carried the weight of years of accumulated tension, a tension that neither family had anticipated on this routine journey. As the young man returned to his seat, the air seemed to thicken with an unspoken promise that this was only the beginning of something far more unsettling. A few moments later, while Brooke was tending to another passenger, a more alarming disruption shattered the fragile calm. The plane, still on the runway, experienced a sudden jolt, more pronounced than the earlier shudder. The unexpected turbulence sent ripples of unease through the cabin. In that split second, as passengers gripped their armrests and exchanged anxious glances, a subtle cry arose from the Walker family. Angela, in a voice that trembled with both fear and defiance, questioned the irregularity of the flight. "What was that? Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone laced with genuine concern for the safety of everyone aboard. Brooke's reaction was instantaneous and marked by a cold precision that betrayed her inner turmoil. Instead of addressing the concern with reassurance, she responded curtly, her tone dismissive. "It's nothing to worry about. Just a minor hiccup." But the words did little to calm the rising anxiety among the passengers, and a ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin. In that moment, the earlier incident with the tray took on a more sinister hue, a sign that the delicate balance of order was slipping into chaos. As the flight attendant moved back to her station, Brooke's thoughts churned relentlessly. The minor spill and subsequent rebuke had unearthed a long-buried anger. An anger fueled not just by the accident, but by years of repressed judgments and an inner conflict between duty and deeply held biases. She had always prided herself on her ability to control her emotions, on her skill in maintaining a professional distance. Yet now, faced with a seemingly trivial mishap, she felt an urge to assert control in a way that was disproportionate to the event. The tension that had been simmering in the background now surged forward, hinting at an internal battle that threatened to erupt at any moment. Outside the windows, the rain intensified, and the plane's engines roared with a renewed vigor as they prepared for takeoff. The atmospheric conditions, heavy with foreboding, seemed to mirror the turmoil within the cabin. The interplay of light and shadow, the relentless patter of raindrops, and the subdued murmur of anxious conversations all contributed to a mounting sense of inevitability. It was as if nature itself was orchestrating a prelude to the storm that was about to break over everyone on board. In the midst of this growing tension, Brooke's gaze inadvertently met that of Marcus Walker. There was a moment, a fleeting, charged second when their eyes locked. In Marcus's steady, unyielding look, Brooke saw not defiance, but a profound sadness and an implicit challenge. It was as if he was silently urging her to reconsider her actions, to see beyond the immediate disruption to the deeper human story unfolding before them. That brief exchange, heavy with unspoken words, foreshadowed the larger conflict that would soon engulf not only the cabin, but also the lives of everyone on that flight. The incident, though seemingly minor at first, had now become a catalyst for something far more significant. The reaction it had elicited from Brooke was just the first tremor in a series of events that promised to shatter the fragile veneer of normalcy. With each passing moment, the air in the cabin grew thicker, laden with the weight of impending confrontation. Brooke's internal struggle was no longer a private matter. It was about to spill over into the open, setting the stage for an unfolding drama that none of the passengers could have foreseen. As the plane inched closer to the runway for takeoff, the tension was palpable. The delicate balance of routine service had been disrupted, and the consequences of that disruption were now poised to unravel. The subtle hints of unrest, Brooke's sharp words, Angela's anxious inquiry, and the silent defiance in Marcus's eyes were the threads of a tapestry that would soon reveal a conflict much larger than a spilled drink or a minor jolt. It was a conflict rooted in prejudice, duty, and the unyielding quest for dignity in a world that too often denied it. In the quiet moments before takeoff, as the aircraft prepared to leave the familiar confines of the tarmac, the stage was set for an upheaval that would challenge every notion of order and fairness. Brooke's actions, though driven by an internal tempest, were about to intersect with the lives of the Walkers in a way that would alter the course of their journey and her own life forever. The inciting incident had been triggered, and with it, the promise of a story that would force each character to confront the shadows of their past and the uncertain light of their future. Brooke continued her duties with a tense efficiency, her mind still reeling from the earlier incident. As the aircraft began its smooth ascent, The cabin transformed from a place of subdued anticipation to a stage where every minor gesture carried heavy significance. The fleeting moment of confrontation with Marcus had left a lingering charge in the air, one that threatened to unravel the delicate balance she fought so hard to maintain. It wasn't long before a new challenge emerged that would shake Brooke's commitment to her carefully cultivated routine. In the rear of the plane, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, Mr. Carter, began quietly arguing with a fellow passenger over a reserved seat. His voice was low but insistent, carrying an undercurrent of desperation that hinted at more than a simple seating dispute. Mr. Carter's brow furrowed as he repeated, "I booked this seat weeks ago. I need it for my connection." His tone was edged with an anxiety that suggested a deeper personal struggle, one that resonated with the underlying tensions of the flight. Brooke was alerted to the commotion by the anxious glances exchanged among passengers. Reluctantly, she approached, her steps measured yet firm. "Sir, please calm down," she said, attempting to inject a note of reassurance into her voice. But her words, laced with a hint of the earlier hardness, failed to ease his mounting frustration. "Calm down? You don't understand." Mr. Carter snapped, his face reddening with both anger and humiliation. The man's outburst quickly caught the attention of a few other passengers, their eyes shifting uneasily between him and the flight attendant. In that charged moment, a secondary figure stepped into view, a younger attendant named Lena, whose gentle demeanor and empathetic eyes contrasted sharply with Brooke's rigid professionalism. Lena's presence was like a soft breeze, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Maybe I can help," Lena offered, placing a reassuring hand on Mr. Carter's shoulder. Her tone was soothing, yet her eyes betrayed a quiet resolve. The intervention momentarily defused the situation, but the incident had already planted a seed of discord. As Brooke moved away, a silent battle waged within her. Mr. Carter's desperate protest mirrored the unspoken pain that she herself had long suppressed. Her initial goal, to manage every detail flawlessly, to serve without prejudice, now seemed increasingly fraught with obstacles that extended far beyond mere passenger mishaps. She watched as Lena, with her patient smile and calm words, managed to convince Mr. Carter to accept an alternative seat. The ease with which Lena navigated the conflict only deepened Brooke's inner turmoil. Was it possible that her own rigid adherence to protocol, driven by hidden biases and old habits, was what truly obstructed a more compassionate resolution? The shift in the cabin's dynamics did not go unnoticed. As Lena returned to her duties, whispers spread among the passengers, and a few exchanged glances of quiet approval. The contrast between Lena's warm approach and Brooke's increasingly curt manner was stark, and it sparked an internal dialogue that would soon ripple through the rest of the flight. Brooke's mind reeled back to moments in the past when empathy had triumphed over routine, times when she had allowed herself to be guided by her heart rather than the strict demands of a role. Yet now, caught in the grip of rising tension and the weight of long-standing prejudices, she struggled to recall that simpler, kinder time. While these conflicts simmered, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift once more. A soft murmur from the forward section signaled the arrival of yet another character into the fray, a quiet woman named Evelyn. Evelyn's presence was almost ethereal. She was traveling alone, her eyes reflective and her expression thoughtful. As she moved down the aisle, a palpable sadness clung to her, mingling with a determination that belied her delicate frame. Rumors among the passengers suggested that Evelyn was no ordinary traveler, that she carried with her a personal story marked by loss and redemption. Her quiet grace in the face of her own pain added a layer of complexity to the flight's unfolding drama. Evelyn's journey had taken her far from home, and the scars of past tragedies were etched subtly in the lines of her face. When she passed by Brooke, there was a brief exchange, a nod, almost imperceptible, of mutual recognition. It was as if Evelyn sensed the storm brewing within the flight attendant. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn's eyes held a silent message of understanding that sometimes the weight of duty could crush the human spirit if left unchallenged. Back at her station, Brooke felt the pressure of these unfolding events intensify. The earlier spat with Mr. Carter and the effortless grace with which Lena had managed the crisis forced her to confront her own limitations. Her internal objective, once so clear and unwavering, now blurred with the realization that the role she had assumed might be contributing to a cycle of discord and misunderstanding. Every instance of conflict, every whispered conversation and frown exchanged among the passengers underscored the fact that the journey was not simply about reaching a destination, it was a crucible for the characters, a place where their deepest vulnerabilities were laid bare. Brooke's thoughts spiraled as she remembered her own past, a series of moments where rigidity had led to regret and where a softer touch might have healed wounds rather than deepened them. The realization struck her with an almost physical force. If she continued down this path, if she allowed her internal conflicts to dictate her actions, then the flight would become a battleground of emotional scars rather than a journey toward reconciliation. She was faced with an obstacle that challenged not only her professional goals, but the very essence of who she was, a person torn between the unyielding demands of duty and the need to embrace her own humanity. As the plane ascended further into the night sky, the internal conflicts began to mirror the turbulence outside. The interplay of shadows and fleeting bursts of light from the passing clouds evoked a sense of impermanence, reminding everyone aboard that even the most carefully maintained order could be disrupted by forces beyond their control. In the midst of this sensory overload, Brooke's inner voice grew louder, urging her to question the status quo, to seek a path that honored both duty and compassion. The turning point came when a whispered conversation between two passengers, a young man and an elderly gentleman, revealed a shared suspicion about the hidden undercurrents on board. Their voices, though soft, carried a weight that resonated with the collective anxiety of the flight. "There's something not right," the young man confided, his tone a mix of fear and determination. "I've seen how people like us get treated. It's as if this whole flight is set up for conflict." The elderly gentleman nodded solemnly, his eyes reflecting years of lived experience and quiet defiance. Their words, laden with a sense of forewarning, hinted at a larger, more systemic conflict that was about to unfold, a conflict that stretched beyond a single incident or individual, tapping into the deeper fractures of society itself. For Brooke, the implications were clear. The small incident at the back of the plane, the calm intervention by Lena, and the silent understanding from Evelyn all converged into a realization that her internal struggle was part of a much larger narrative. Her initial goal of simply managing the flight was now compromised by the need to confront the very biases and challenges that had long defined her interactions. The obstacle she faced was not merely a disruption in routine service, but a profound reckoning with the forces of prejudice and the enduring need for empathy. In that moment, the flight was no longer just a vehicle for travel. It had become a microcosm of the world outside, a place where hidden wounds could no longer be ignored. Every whispered word, every fleeting look exchanged among the passengers spoke of a shared pain and a mutual longing for understanding. And as the aircraft soared higher into the stormy night, the stakes grew ever higher. Brooke realized that the path ahead demanded more than just adherence to duty. It required a transformation of the heart, a willingness to confront her own limitations in order to foster a sense of genuine connection. The first turning point had arrived, reshaping the course of the flight and challenging each character to redefine what it meant to serve, to care, and to belong. The subtle complexities of the cabin's interactions laid bare the truth that the journey was as much about the evolution of the self as it was about the physical distance traveled. And in that unfolding moment of quiet rebellion and hope, the stage was set for a conflict that would test the very core of every soul on board. The atmosphere inside the plane shifted suddenly as the engines roared to life with renewed intensity, and the gentle patter of rain against the windows transformed into a staccato rhythm that echoed the rising heartbeat of the cabin. The tension that had simmered earlier reached a fever pitch, setting the stage for a confrontation that would alter the course of the flight. Brooke moved through the aisle with determined steps, her face a mask of rigid professionalism even as the turmoil inside her surged like a tempest. Yet the storm outside was not the only force gathering strength that night. In the middle of the cabin, a heated discussion erupted between Marcus Walker and another passenger, a man whose skeptical eyes and sharp tongue belied a deep-seated prejudice. The stranger accused Marcus of seeking preferential treatment, his words dripping with disdain as he insinuated that the Walker's calm demeanor was a guise for hidden demands. "You expect the world to bend to your will just because you carry your burdens with you," he sneered, his voice rising above the murmurs of nearby passengers. Marcus's quiet strength faltered for a moment under the barrage of hostility, and the air around them seemed to crackle with the electricity of raw emotion. At that moment, Lena, with her innate empathy, stepped forward. "There's no need for this," she said softly, her words a counterpoint to the stranger's vitriol. Her calm intervention was like a cooling breeze amid the rising heat, yet it did little to quell the underlying anger. Brooke's eyes flickered toward the unfolding scene. A part of her recognized the truth in Marcus's silent protest, while another part clung to the strict protocols she had always followed. It was a revelation that cut deeper than the physical turbulence shaking the aircraft, a realization that the rigid lines she had drawn between duty and prejudice were beginning to blur. The plane shuddered, and a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, casting stark shadows on every face. In that brief, electric moment, Brooke's inner conflict manifested in a way she could no longer control. The flash revealed her strained expression, the slight tightening of her features that betrayed more than mere professionalism. Marcus, catching sight of that momentary vulnerability, stepped closer. "Brooke," he said quietly, his tone not accusatory, but laden with a plea for understanding, "we're all caught in this storm. We need to look after one another." His words, simple and sincere, hung in the charged air, mingling with the scent of ozone and the sound of rain drumming on metal. But the stranger was not ready to relent. His voice rose again, filled with a venom that seemed to draw strength from the storm. "You're all the same," he spat, directing his anger toward the Walkers and, by extension, their shared humanity. "Always expecting special treatment, special pity." The remark sliced through the fragile calm that had just begun to take shape. In that moment, allegiances formed as quickly as they unraveled. Passengers who had hitherto remained silent now leaned forward, drawn into the orbit of the confrontation. Lena's eyes softened with both compassion and resolve. "We're not asking for special treatment," she said, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of tension. "We're asking for respect, for fairness. Isn't that what we all deserve?" Her words carried a weight that seemed to shift the balance of the conversation, prompting even a few hesitant nods from those sitting nearby. Yet the stranger's resentment continued to boil, and his words became sharper, more isolating. In the midst of this verbal onslaught, Brooke felt an internal chasm widen within her. The flash of lightning had not only illuminated the cabin, but also the hidden corners of her own heart, exposing the long-held biases and uncertainties that she had kept locked away. As she moved to intervene, her hands trembling ever so slightly, she realized that the role she had so fiercely clung to, of the unflappable, impartial flight attendant, was crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. In that charged moment, she was forced to confront the painful reality that her own actions, driven by deep-seated prejudices, might have set the stage for this discord. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, its relentless drumming mirroring the tumult within Brooke. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Marcus's with a mixture of regret and determination. It was then that she understood that the conflict was not simply a clash of words, but a battle for the very soul of their shared journey. The symbolism was stark. The tempest raging beyond the plane's fragile skin was a reflection of the inner storm tearing at each of them. The rain, the lightning, even the trembling metal of the aircraft, each element played its part in narrating a tale of broken barriers and the desperate hope for reconciliation. As the verbal confrontation reached its zenith, a sudden announcement over the intercom broke through the clamor. The captain's voice, firm yet laced with concern, informed everyone that due to the severe weather conditions, a precautionary landing was imminent. The unexpected news sent a ripple of anxiety through the cabin. For a brief moment, the conflict paused as all eyes turned toward the screens and the windows, absorbing the reality that the external storm was about to force an unscheduled halt to their journey. This announcement served as both a literal and metaphorical turning point, a reminder that nature's unpredictable forces were the ultimate equalizer. Amid the temporary lull, alliances began to form in the wake of shared vulnerability. Marcus's earlier confrontation, which had stoked the flames of anger, now took on a different hue. Passengers who had once watched from afar now stepped closer to one another, their whispered conversations filled with cautious optimism. Even the stranger, though still seething, seemed momentarily subdued by the magnitude of the external crisis. Lena, always the peacemaker, quietly organized a small circle of concerned passengers, urging them to support one another as they braced for the upcoming landing. Brooke stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding with the realization that the stakes had risen far beyond a single heated exchange. The flight was transforming into a crucible where every hidden sentiment, every fear, every prejudice, every yearning for connection was being laid bare. The revelation of her own internal conflict became a catalyst for change. In the reflection of the overhead lights, she saw not only her professional mask, but also the vulnerability of a woman who had long denied her own complexity. The confrontation was no longer just about managing the cabin. It was about reckoning with the very essence of who she was. In that charged pause before the imminent landing, Brooke made a silent promise. The storm outside was a force of nature, unstoppable and indifferent. But within her, there was a spark of hope, a desire to dismantle the walls she had built around herself, and to embrace the messy, unpredictable truth of human connection. The midnight sky, alive with flashes of lightning and sheets of rain, bore witness to her transformation. It was a moment of clarity amid chaos, a turning point that signaled the beginning of a new understanding for everyone on board. As the cabin slowly settled into a fragile calm, the symbolism of the unfolding events resonated in every whispered word and tentative gesture. The external storm had forced a confrontation of inner storms, and in doing so, it set the stage for alliances to be forged, betrayals to be unveiled, and personal growth to be embraced. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the path to redemption would be fraught with peril. Yet, in that fleeting moment of shared vulnerability, the promise of transformation glimmered like a beacon amid the raging darkness. The storm outside reached a fevered pitch as the plane continued its uncertain journey through dark, turbulent skies. The cabin, already heavy with tension, now seemed to pulse with an almost tangible dread. Every flash of lightning and roar of thunder deepened the unease, and Brooke felt her control slipping further with every passing second. The earlier disputes, the quiet murmurs of discontent, and the storm's wrath combined to create a maelstrom that threatened to shatter the fragile peace within the narrow aisles. Brooke moved from row to row, her hands trembling slightly as she attempted to reassure anxious passengers. Yet, with every word, the sound of her voice wavered. The flight attendant's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She was determined to maintain order, but the pressure of the mounting challenges began to blur the line between duty and personal judgment. As she passed the Walker family once more, their weary eyes and tense expressions seemed to mirror the storm outside. She remembered Marcus's steady gaze from earlier, Angela's soft concern, and the silent defiance in Tiana's eyes. Their presence, once a quiet reminder of unity and resilience, now felt like a looming obstacle to the meticulous order she had long guarded. The intercom crackled with another announcement, a notification that the weather had deteriorated further and that a diversion to a smaller regional airport was imminent. The news sent a ripple of anxiety through the cabin, and passengers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some whispered prayers, while others gripped their armrests as if clinging to hope. For Brooke, the diversion represented more than a delay. It was a harbinger of chaos that would test the very limits of her control. In the midst of the brewing panic, a sudden commotion erupted near the Walker family's row. A raised voice cut through the murmurs. A passenger, eyes wide with fear and indignation, shouted that someone had tampered with the emergency equipment in the overhead compartment. The accusation was vague and filled with suspicion, but it ignited a spark of distrust among those nearby. In the chaotic shuffle, Brooke's heart pounded as she hurried to intervene, her mind already racing with the potential fallout of yet another crisis. When she reached the scene, she found Angela Walker calmly, trying to explain that she had merely been reorganizing some of the overhead items after the earlier disturbance. But the frightened passenger's voice had grown louder, and his words carried an accusation that cut through the din. "I saw you near the compartment. You must be hiding something." The allegation was absurd, yet in that moment, in the haze of fear and uncertainty, it struck a chord. Brooke's eyes narrowed as she took in the situation, feeling a familiar surge of protectiveness over the established order she was so desperate to preserve. Something inside her snapped. The cumulative weight of the evening. The earlier spat with Mr. Carter, the tension with the Walker family, the dissonance between her duty and her unspoken biases pushed her toward an action she had long hoped to avoid. In a voice that trembled with both anger and desperation, she addressed Angela with a sharpness that startled everyone in the vicinity. "You're causing unnecessary trouble. I won't allow this chaos to jeopardize everyone's safety." Her tone was icy and final, leaving no room for explanation. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The suddenness of her command rippled through the cabin. Marcus immediately stood, his eyes dark with disbelief and hurt. Tiana's face turned pale as she clutched Darius's hand tightly. The other passengers exchanged shocked glances. What had begun as a routine flight was now descending into a public spectacle of discord. In that charged moment, the storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil within the plane, each thunderclap a grim punctuation to the escalating conflict. Before anyone could respond, a voice from the back of the cabin demanded, "Is this true? Is she really ordering you off the plane?" The question, whispered by a passenger whose face was partly hidden in shadow, spread like wildfire. It was as if every eye now focused on the Walker family and on Brooke, whose inner struggle had burst forth into overt action. Lena, the younger attendant who had earlier exuded calm compassion, rushed forward. "Please, everyone, let's remain calm," she pleaded, her tone gentle but firm. Yet even her soothing words were drowned out by the rising chorus of murmurs and accusations. In the midst of the growing uproar, an unexpected twist unfolded. A passenger sitting near the back, a quiet, unassuming man with a well-worn camera bag, had been recording the unfolding events on his phone. He had captured every moment, the raised voices, the fearful glances, and most damning of all, the moment Brooke's voice had hardened into that decisive, condemning tone. Unbeknownst to Brooke, the recording would soon shatter the remnants of anonymity and control she had so desperately clung to. The cameraman's recording, full of raw emotion and unfiltered truth, carried an unintended power. As the plane began its descent toward the diversion airport, whispers among the passengers turned into a murmur of shared outrage. The realization that their ordeal might soon be exposed to the wider world set hearts racing and alliances shifting. The Walker family, already on edge, found themselves thrust into a position of vulnerability. The passengers who had once sat quietly now seemed to rally behind the Walkers, their expressions a mix of indignation and solidarity. Brooke stood frozen for a moment in the aisle, her eyes wide as she registered the collective reaction around her. The unexpected twist, this digital evidence of her outburst, was a blow from which she could not recover. It transformed her role on the flight from that of a mere enforcer of rules to a central figure in a moral crisis that threatened to upend everything. The storm outside, now a deafening roar, paralleled the tumult in her heart as she realized that her actions were no longer confined to the narrow space of the aircraft. They were about to be unleashed into a world that was watching, judging, and waiting for Marcus's grip tightened around Angela's hand, and Tiana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The family had come together to endure the unpredictable journey only to be cast aside by someone who was meant to safeguard them. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, as if the very fabric of their unity had been torn by an act of injustice. Brooke, on the other hand, felt the weight of the world settle upon her shoulders. The mounting challenges, the relentless storm, the spiraling chaos in the cabin, and now the undeniable evidence of her failure, closed in around her. Her mind raced as she tried to justify her actions, to rationalize the internal battle that had driven her to this precipice. But deep down, she knew that nothing could undo what had been done. The unexpected twist was a turning point, a moment when the carefully constructed veneer of control shattered into a million irretrievable fragments. As the aircraft began its final descent into the dimly lit airport, the atmosphere was charged with a bitter mix of anger, regret, and fear. The passengers braced themselves for the unknown, while Brooke stood isolated, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. In the tense silence that followed, the storm outside seemed to recede into the background, replaced by the weight of human judgment and the inescapable consequences of a single, irreversible decision. In that decisive moment, the path ahead was forever altered. The digital recording, now circulating among a few courageous passengers, promised to expose the truth. The once hidden biases and the mounting challenges were no longer a private struggle. They had become a public spectacle, one that would haunt Brooke long after the plane had touched down. The unexpected twist had irrevocably changed the trajectory of the journey, setting the stage for conflicts that would extend far beyond the confines of that turbulent night, and leaving everyone aboard to wonder how far the ripple effects of this singular act might spread. The plane shuddered as it touched down on the wet, dimly lit runway. The storm had spent its fury on the skies above, but its echoes still vibrated through the metal body of the aircraft and in the hearts of everyone on board. Inside the cabin, tension was as thick as the humid night air. The passengers, still trembling from the earlier chaos, huddled together in quiet clusters as the reality of their arrival sank in. Outside the windows, puddles reflected the neon glow of the terminal while dark clouds loomed overhead, a reminder of the relentless forces that had mirrored the turmoil within. Brooke stood frozen in the aisle, her uniform now stained not only with the remnants of her professional duty, but also with the heavy burden of her actions. Every step she had taken, every harsh word she had uttered, now seemed to reverberate like a drumbeat in her mind. The recording of her outburst was already making its rounds among the passengers, and soon whispers of it would reach the ears of those who held power beyond the confines of the plane. The weight of public judgment and her own conscience pressed down on her, leaving her feeling both exposed and isolated. In the terminal, the tension exploded into a maelstrom of voices and emotions. The Walker family, who had endured the mounting hostility with silent dignity, were now the center of an unfolding drama. Marcus and Angela Walker gathered their children close as they made their way to the crowded arrival hall. Their faces were etched with exhaustion and sorrow, yet there was a spark of determination in their eyes, a defiant refusal to be diminished by the injustice they had suffered. The gentle glow of the terminal lights cast long shadows on the polished floor, creating a stage for a confrontation that no one had ever wished for. Brooke's colleagues, led by Lena, followed closely behind as they emerged into the bustling hall. Lena's eyes were filled with a mixture of compassion and quiet resolve. She had stood by Brooke's side earlier, trying to smooth over the escalating conflict, and now she recognized that the night's events had gone far beyond a simple error in judgment. The murmurs of the gathered crowd grew louder as someone began to speak out, and soon a small group of passengers, voices unified by indignation, demanded accountability. Their words, simple and direct, cut through the din. This is not right. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Amid the rising chorus of voices, Marcus Walker stepped forward. His steady gait and calm authority commanded attention. In a clear, resonant tone, he spoke of dignity and fairness. He recalled the moments of quiet suffering they had endured, the furtive glances, the whispered comments, and the ultimate public humiliation. His words carried the pain of lived experience, mingled with a steadfast hope for a better tomorrow. The raw honesty in his voice was like a beacon in the darkness, calling for an end to the cycle of prejudice and hurt. As Marcus spoke, the crowd's anger turned into a powerful surge of support. Passengers who had remained silent now added their voices, sharing stories of personal trials and instances of unspoken bias. The terminal transformed into a forum of shared grievances and aspirations. The air was electric with the promise of change, yet at the same time, it crackled with the potential for further conflict. Every face in the room was a canvas of emotion, anguish, fury, and an unyielding desire for justice. Brooke, standing near the center of it all, felt every word like a heavy stone dropping into her heart. The public exposure of her harsh behavior was not just a personal failure. It had become a symbol of a deeper systemic problem. In that moment, she realized that the storm she had tried so desperately to control was far more powerful than her own inner demons. The weight of her actions pressed upon her, and the regret that surged through her was mingled with a desperate need for redemption. She longed to undo the hurt she had caused, to reconcile the rigid professional persona with the possibility of genuine care and understanding. As the confrontation reached its peak, the arrival hall itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The hum of conversation, the soft rustle of clothing, and the distant sound of rain pattering on the terminal's glass all became part of an overwhelming symphony of human emotion. In the midst of the chaos, a sudden moment of stillness fell over the crowd. It was as if time had slowed, and every soul in the room was held captive by the gravity of the moment. Brooke took a tentative step forward, her voice barely audible over the tumult. I am sorry, she began, her words quivering with sincerity. The apology was not grand or theatrical. It was a quiet admission of guilt, spoken by a person who recognized her own failings. The silence that followed was palpable. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke, and the only sound was the soft beating of hearts trying to find a common rhythm. Then Lena's gentle voice broke through the stillness, urging everyone to seek understanding rather than revenge. "We can learn from this," she said, her eyes meeting Brooke's with a look that was both forgiving and firm. In that instant, the arrival hall became a crucible for transformation. Marcus, still standing tall, extended a hand toward Brooke, a gesture laden with both the pain of betrayal and the hope for reconciliation. His eyes, though still shadowed by hurt, shone with the possibility of healing. Around them, the once divided crowd began to murmur words of agreement, of shared dreams for a society where empathy would triumph over prejudice. The symbol of the storm, the turbulent night outside, now took on a new meaning, one that mirrored the turbulent path toward a better future. As the passengers gradually dispersed, each returning to their lives with the echoes of the night etched into their memories, Brooke remained at the center of the hall. The path to redemption would not be easy, and the scars of the past would linger. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, there was a sense of catharsis, a promise that even in the darkest moments, the light of understanding could be kindled. The vibrant energy of the crowd, the shared pain and hope, and the gentle resolve in Marcus's extended hand all served as a reminder that every act of remorse held the seed of change. The final moments of the night arrived as the storm outside finally subsided into a soft drizzle. The rain, which had once mirrored the fury of the conflict, now fell with a quiet persistence, washing away traces of anger and regret. The terminal's neon lights reflected in the damp pavement, and a calm settled over the crowd as people began to leave. For Brooke, the journey ahead was uncertain, a long road of introspection, public accountability, and personal growth. Yet, as she looked into the eyes of those who had gathered, she recognized that this was a turning point not just for her, but for everyone present. In that emotionally charged climax, the conflict that had once threatened to shatter the lives of all aboard had instead become the catalyst for change. The vivid images of the storm, the powerful voices in the arrival hall, and the quiet yet profound gesture of reconciliation formed a tapestry of hope amid despair. It was a moment where the pain of the past met the promise of the future, a future where understanding, empathy, and forgiveness could begin to mend the deepest wounds. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time the aircraft finally taxied to a halt at the regional airport. The chaotic moments of the flight were slowly being replaced by an uneasy calm as passengers disembarked into the cool night air. Inside the terminal, a subdued murmur of conversation and footsteps mingled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The tension that had dominated the journey was gradually dissipating, leaving behind an air of reflective stillness. Brooke stood by a window, watching droplets race down the glass as she absorbed the gravity of what had transpired. The stark fluorescent glare of the terminal contrasted with the dark, damp night outside, and in that light, she saw the truth of her actions more clearly. Every harsh word, every moment of unrestrained judgment echoed in her mind like a lesson etched in time. The flight, once meant to be just another routine journey, had become a turning point in her life, a moment of reckoning that she could not ignore. Passengers moved around her, some in quiet conversation about the events of the evening, others simply lost in their own thoughts. Marcus Walker and his family, though still burdened with the sting of recent events, appeared determined to move forward with dignity. Marcus had taken a leading role in soothing the hurt, offering kind words to strangers, and ensuring his family stayed united in the aftermath. His steady presence had a ripple effect on those around him, gently nudging the collective mood toward healing. In the center of the terminal, a small group had gathered, a mix of staff and passengers engaged in a low, earnest conversation about what they had witnessed. Lena, with her warm smile and compassionate eyes, was at the heart of it, mediating with a calm confidence that resonated deeply with everyone present. She spoke softly about the importance of recognizing one's mistakes and the power of empathy to transform even the darkest moments. Her words, though quiet, carried a weight that seemed to settle in every corner of the room. Brooke listened from a short distance away, feeling both isolated and part of this newfound community. The harsh glare of guilt was slowly being tempered by the possibility of forgiveness, not just from others, but from herself. In the quiet moments that followed, she mustered the courage to step forward again. Approaching Marcus, she offered a tentative nod, a silent acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused. Marcus met her gaze with an expression that held a mixture of sorrow and cautious hope, a silent invitation for change. Later, as the terminal's lights began to dim with the late hour, Brooke found herself alone in a quiet corner. The echoes of a night, the storm, the heated voices, the subtle yet significant gestures of reconciliation played over in her mind. She reflected on the deep-seated fears and biases that had driven her earlier actions. In that reflective solitude, she recognized that her rigid adherence to routine had blinded her to the humanity that each passenger carried within. She understood now that her role was not just to maintain order, but also to nurture compassion. Outside, the steady patter of rain against the pavement offered a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil inside her heart. Every droplet seemed to carry with it a promise of renewal, washing away remnants of anger and regret. In that moment, Brooke resolved to embark on a journey of self-forgiveness and transformation, a journey that would not erase the past, but would allow her to grow from it. The public exposure of her outburst, once a source of shame, began to reveal itself as an opportunity to confront her own shortcomings and emerge wiser. The quiet murmur of voices and footsteps in the terminal slowly faded as the crowd dispersed. Yet, even as the space emptied, the impact of the evening lingered, a tapestry of sorrow, hope, and the enduring possibility of change. Some passengers exchanged final nods and quiet words of encouragement with one another, their shared experience binding them in a way that transcended the confines of the flight. In the collective silence, there was an unspoken understanding that each of them had been touched by something profound that night. Brooke eventually made her way to a small waiting area near the departure gates, where she sat for several long moments in contemplation. The soft glow of a solitary lamp illuminated her face, revealing traces of fatigue and remorse, but also a spark of determination. The recording of her earlier actions had begun to circulate on social media, casting her in a harsh, unforgiving light. Yet, amid the criticism and public shaming, there was also a call for introspection, a reminder that change begins with self-awareness. In a quiet conversation with Lena, who had not left her side, Brooke shared her innermost thoughts. "I know I've done something terrible," she confessed, her voice heavy with regret. "I let my fears, my biases rule me, and in doing so, I hurt people who didn't deserve it." Lena's gentle gaze held no judgment, only compassion and understanding. "We all have shadows within us," Lena replied softly. "What matters now is that you choose to step into the light, to learn and to heal." Those words, spoken with sincere kindness, resonated deeply within Brooke's soul. As the night drew to a close, the terminal slowly emptied, leaving behind an atmosphere of quiet reflection. Brooke knew that the path ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The events of the flight had peeled back the layers of pretense and forced her to confront uncomfortable truths. Now, with the storm both outside and within subsiding, she felt the beginnings of a transformation, a delicate but persistent urge to rebuild her identity on a foundation of empathy and understanding. In the days that followed, news of the flight and its dramatic events spread through social media and local news channels. Brooke's public apology, heartfelt and sincere, sparked a broader conversation about the importance of compassion and the dangers of unchecked prejudice. While not everyone was quick to forgive, many saw in her remorse a willingness to change, a sign that even deeply entrenched habits could be overcome through introspection and effort. The incident, though painful, became a catalyst for broader discussions about accountability, diversity, and the power of redemption. The final moments of that turbulent night left room for reflection, a poignant reminder that every end carries the seed of a new beginning. The conflicts that had erupted in the cramped confines of an airplane cabin were now diffusing into a larger dialogue about humanity and connection. Brooke's journey was far from over, but in that quiet space of resolution, she took her first genuine steps toward healing. There was no grand proclamation of victory or complete absolution, only the humble acceptance of a flawed past and the uncertain promise of a better future. In the soft glow of the early morning, as the first light of day touched the horizon, Brooke emerged from the terminal with a heavy heart, yet a determined spirit. The memories of that stormy night would linger, a constant reminder of the price of intolerance and the value of empathy. And as she walked away, each step measured and reflective, she carried with her the lesson that every mistake holds within it the potential for redemption, and that even in our darkest moments, the light of understanding can begin to shine once more. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.